During this talk, I will mention gender quite often. Please understand that I'm using the standard English meaning of the term, not the feminist definition that continues to creep into the language. In English, gender is a synonym for the noun sex, meaning the two categories into which organisms such as humans are divided for determining reproductive roles. In contrast, feminism asserts that gender is a social construct entirely separate to biological sex. Unfortunately, the feminist definition is growing in prevalence, and I urge the community to avoid falling into a trap and allowing feminists to define the terms of the discussion. The fact that some members of the human species do not fit well into the male and female genders is well established by science. People who do not fit into one of the categories of male or female are called intersex. Gender is a template against which behavioural, physical, and medical norms can be measured. Certain medical results that are normal for one gender may be a concern for the other. My position is simply that there are two genders, but not everyone has a well-defined gender. The fact that gender can be difficult to determine in some cases does not invalidate the concept itself. Life is full of definitions that get fuzzy around the edges, including definition of species. With that clear, I will now discuss matriarchies and related concepts. Claims of matriarchal societies are fairly common in the media and public discourse. In fact, despite widespread feminist bias, virtually all anthropologists agree that there are not, nor have there ever been, true matriarchal societies. While some claims about the existence of matriarchies are ideological in nature, many simply arise out of ignorance. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines a matriarchy as 1. A family group or state governed by a matriarch, or 2. A system of social organisation in which descent and inheritance are traced through the female line. Here we see, even within dictionaries, confusion as to the nature of a matriarchy, with the second definition actually being a definition for the related term matrilineality. When most claims about the existence of a matriarchy are made about a society is almost always some combination of matrilineal, matrifocal, and matrilocal. Many societies, in fact, have one or more of these characteristics. Societies with various combinations of these characteristics are well documented, but there are no matriarchies. Different societies, rather, grant varying levels of power to their men and women. A matrilineal society is one in which descent is traced through the female line. This often results in power and property descending down the female line as well. Matrifocality refers to the households being led by a woman or where a man is absent from the household. As such, modern African American culture could be said to be matrifocal, with the large number of families in which fathers are absent. Matrilocality refers to a cultural tendency for men to relocate to reside with their new wives after marriage. This may mean relocating to their wife's village or living with their family. Matrilocal societies are fairly common. Presented here are a few examples of Indigenous societies in which these various characteristics have been noted. Unfortunately, widespread feminist bias in the social sciences and a feminist push towards asserting female supremacy has called much research into Indigenous societies into question. The Brockway of Costa Rica are an Indigenous group with a matrilineal clan system. A child inherits their clan from their mother. As is generally true in matrilineal societies, only women can inherit land among the Brockway. The Garos of India use a matrilineal clan system in which the youngest daughter typically inherits land from her mother. A Garos man will leave his parents' house at puberty and live in his wife's house when they marry. This would also make the Garos matrilocal. Another well-known example are the Hopi of the United States, which are also traditionally matrilineal and matrilocal. Like other examples, they use a clan system. The women of the father's family will name children. Some researchers claim Hopi society, like traditional Western society, has a widespread belief in female moral superiority. The Mosuo are often cited as matriarchal culture. This is difficult to justify when political power has been historically held by men. It continues to be held by men. The Mosuo, rather, are a matrilineal, matrilocal, and matrifocal society. Some commentators have noted that the Mosuo encourage the belief that the society is a matriarchy as it has increased tourism. Some sources claim that the Mosuo women do all the work while men just rest. Other sources claim also women do all of the housework and cooking, while men focus on tending animals. Mosuo nobility practiced a dual lineality, in which a boy would inherit his father's rights and status, and a girl her mother's. Mosuo society has always been feudal, with men holding positions of power. This brings us to the ancient matriarchy. Some feminists claim that ancient societies were characterized by matriarchies. This view is not taken seriously by mainstream scholars, but it persists to the present time. As with modern societies, these ancient cultures were usually some combination of matrifocal, matrilineal, and matrilocal. Some feminists claim that these ancient matriarchal cultures were taken over or defeated by aggressive patriarchal cultures, and that evidence of the past matriarchy was systematically hidden by the patriarchy. Some proponents of ancient matriarchies have even claimed that ancient human culture did not understand the connection between sexual intercourse and pregnancy. The truth is that there are no known human cultures, today or in the past, that did not know that sex causes babies. Unbeknownst to most feminists, the notion of the ancient matriarchy was in fact invented by 19th century European men, and is a variant of the notion of the noble savage. The notion of the noble savage is now widely regarded as racist. The period of human history in which we have had a significant impact on the planet is today called the Holocene era. This period begins about 10,000 years before the present. The mainstream view is that humans invented agriculture, which then gradually spread around the world. Of late, feminists have taken to claiming that women invented agriculture. I not only reject that, I reject the idea that anyone invented agriculture. An alternative view, which is supported by the evidence, is that humans always knew how to grow crops, but didn't do so because it was too much like hard work. Children have always watched seeds sprout. It isn't a huge leap to realize that planting a seed will result in a plant growing. Indeed, some hunter-gatherers deliberately plant seeds as they move, knowing that they can return and eat food from these plants later. Even today, hunter-gatherers work the same or fewer hours per day than settled communities. And that's when we take into account that modern hunter-gatherers live on marginal land. Before agriculture, hunter-gatherers lived on the best land. The archaeological record indicates that hunter-gatherers were taller and healthier than the agriculturalists that came after them. These both likely occurred because hunter-gatherers had a more varied diet. Hunter-gatherers eat opportunistically, while farmers plant seeds suitable for growing. Hunter-gatherers lived longer, healthier lives than the agriculturalists. But if being a hunter-gatherer was so good, why would anyone give it up? One hypothesis proposes that they did it only because they had to. Agriculture has one redeeming feature. It can feed more people per unit area than hunting and gathering can. In this sense, agriculture is a trap. Once a society adopts agriculture, the population explodes and they can't revert to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Even as far back as the 19th century, natural philosophers recognized that tasks performed in hunter-gatherer societies were gendered, and this is actually where the term comes from. Men hunt and women gather. This is, of course, something of an oversimplification, and we can expect that everyone pitched in when needed. Thus, women will hunt in some cases, while men may assist with gathering when not out hunting. Nevertheless, the work was gendered. We find some interesting biological differences between men and women that seem to relate well to the different work. Animals generally see by being able to differentiate colour, track objects, or both. Humans are the latter, with human vision being able to differentiate colour and track objects. There are, however, notable gender differences. Women generally have better colour vision than men, while men are generally better at tracking fast-moving objects. These slight differences clearly match to the roles in a hunter-gatherer society. By having better colour vision, women could more easily distinguish safe plants from dangerous ones. Being able to track fast-moving objects is an obvious advantage when hunting game. There is a lot of confusion over mortality rates and lifespan. There seems to be widespread belief in the community that humans in the past lived accelerated lives, married with kids by 15 and dead at 30. This is nonsense, but the idea persists. One problem is that historians used to report lifespan at birth, but this gave a skewed impression of lifespan. Before the advent of modern medicine, all human societies experienced high infant mortality rates. Reporting life expectancy at birth yields a significantly lower life expectancy for people who survive childhood than they would have actually enjoyed. If we have 3 individuals, with one living until 60 but the other 2 dying soon after birth, we would see an average life expectancy of around 20 years. Clearly, this average is meaningless for any of these individuals. Without going into measures of variance like the standard deviation, there are alternative ways of measuring life expectancy that yield better estimates of adult lifespan. Today, historians are increasingly reporting life expectancy at 5, 10, or even 15, so as to remove the impact of infant and child mortality. This gives a much better estimate of adult life expectancy. Today, men often have to put up with accusations of man flu. Proponents of man flu claim that men collapse and need to be coddled as a result of getting the most minor sniffle. This is deeply insulting to men as a gender, but it also happens to be wrong. All around the world, men consistently take less sick leave than women. This is true even when childless men and women are compared. I have proposed a hypothesis on illness. When men get ill, they are typically sick longer but have fewer symptoms. Most symptoms of illness are actually part of the immune system's response to the invader. In ancient times, men would rove further from camp. A sick woman would be no more than a few hours from camp and could walk home to rest. A sick man could be days from camp. As a result, the men needed the capacity to stay on their feet. If they became unable to move due to illness far from camp, they would likely die. Having a hunting party wait around for days while one man recovers from a virus would not be practical. As a result, men evolved an immune response which resulted in fewer symptoms. The trade-off is that men will remain sick for longer. This is consistent with observation, men being more likely to go to work sick and less likely to seek medical treatment. This highlights an important point. The last thing we should be doing is shaming men for feeling sick. Men already largely ignore their health. We should be encouraging men to seek medical assistance and to rest when ill. Shaming them with man flu does the opposite. To their credit, an Australian insurance company ran radio commercials several years ago making this exact point. Everyone will be better off if men lived longer, even Miss Andrews, since everyone benefits from work carried out by men. Invisible men, I mean. The invisible men are the men doing all those dirty and dangerous jobs necessary for an industrial society to function. They're very easy to miss while sitting in an air-conditioned high-rise office where lunch is no further away than the cafeteria. There may also be other reasons why men take significantly less sick leave than women. Stoicism, a trait more often associated with men than women, may encourage men to tough it out. Notably, Stoicism is often cited by feminists when they talk about toxic masculinity, an otherwise poorly defined concept. Stoicism can be self-destructive, but it can also lead men to greatness. Male variability may also play a role. Men vary more in height, weight, and many other physical characteristics, including intelligence. Astoundingly, greater variance among men even appears to be true when it comes to personality. It seems likely that immune response would also be subject to male variability. I will now provide 3 vignettes talking about particular times and places. These are prime examples of a trend we see throughout history. Rather than women being the unwilling pawns of the patriarchy, the roles are more similar to men of the same social class than women of other social classes. Aristocratic women can and did step up to lead great houses, manage estates, plot and scheme, and rule kingdoms. The first vignette is called The Ptolemies, a soap opera. Almost everyone has heard of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. They fought against Octavian for control of what would soon be the Roman Empire after the death of Julius Caesar. They lost to Octavian. Shakespeare wrote a play about it. But there is so much more to the story. Cleopatra was a descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals. Ptolemy was left in charge of Egypt by Alexander and eventually founded a dynasty that ruled over the land for 275 years. The Ptolemies weren't very inventive when it came to names. The names Ptolemy, Berenice, Arsinoe, and Cleopatra feature prominently among family members. At the time of the conflict with Octavian, Cleopatra was pharaoh of Egypt. The preceding 3 decades was a story worthy of popular TV series Game of Thrones. Ptolemy XII was deposed by the Egyptian people and fled to Rome. His eldest daughter, Berenice IV, then seized the throne. I'm sure the Egyptians didn't rise up to just replace one member of the Ptolemaic dynasty with another. With Roman assistance, he was able to return to Egypt and retake the throne. He then had his daughter Berenice executed. Ptolemy XII then named his young son, Ptolemy XIII, and another daughter, Cleopatra VII, as joint heirs to the throne of Egypt. Cleopatra VII is, of course, a woman known today simply by the mononym Cleopatra. Young Ptolemy was married to his sister Cleopatra, as was the custom among pharaohs. Gradually, Cleopatra's power grew over that of Ptolemy, with her face appearing on coins and his being omitted from official documents. Ptolemy and his supporters ultimately decided to try to eliminate his rival. They managed to get Cleopatra to flee the country. At this point, another of Ptolemy's sisters, Arsinoe IV, asserted a claim on the throne of Egypt. Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt as a result of events occurring in the Roman Civil War. Cleopatra returned to Egypt and was famously able to have herself carried into Caesar's room in a wrought-up carpet. The carpet was unfurled and Cleopatra appeared, or so the legend goes. This scene is, of course, so dramatic that it's virtually always represented in recreations of the story. Caesar and Cleopatra entered into a relationship around this time, and she would later bear him a son, Caesarion. At this point, Ptolemy allied with Arsinoe against Cleopatra and Julius Caesar. The two sides fought over the Egyptian capital of Alexandria, seriously damaging the city. Ultimately, the arrival of Roman reinforcements turned the tide. Ptolemy fled, and history records that he ignominiously drowned in the Nile. Arsinoe was exiled to live out her days in a religious temple after Caesar was pressured to keep her alive by powerful figures in Rome. It wasn't to be, though. After the death of Julius Caesar, Cleopatra took up with Mark Antony. Antony later had Arsinoe murdered at the request of Cleopatra. Mark Antony and Cleopatra then went on to fight Octavian in yet another Roman civil war. They lost. Antony took his own life while Cleopatra was captured by Octavian. She also later took her own life. The second vignette is the story of Mary, Jane, Mary, Elizabeth, Joan, and Catherine, and is set in Western Europe. Mary I was the eldest daughter of King Henry VIII. She should not be confused with her cousin and contemporary, Mary, Queen of Scots. After Henry VIII died, his minor son Edward took the throne. Edward was a sickly boy and died at 15. Edward left the crown to his cousin, Lady Jane Grey, who was Protestant like himself. Edward didn't want his older sister Mary to get the crown. After Edward died, Lady Jane Grey briefly wore the crown, although she didn't live long enough to have a coronation. Mary I raised an army and marched on London. Support for Grey collapsed, and Mary I was pronounced queen. In the end, Lady Jane Grey's head ended up in a basket rather than wearing a crown. Mary I ended up with the moniker Bloody Mary due to her habit of torturing and executing any of her subjects that did not agree with her religious views. Edward was right to try to keep the crown from her. Mary I married fellow Catholic Philip of Spain. The terms of the marriage contract made her and her foreign husband joint rulers of England. He could not act without her consent. It is clear that the English nobility trusted an English woman to rule more than a foreign man. Nationality trumps gender. When Mary died in 1558, the crown did not remain with her foreign husband, but rather went to her English half-sister, Elizabeth I. After the death of Mary with the English crown in the hands of Elizabeth, Philip returned to Spain. One could say he was banished to Iberia. While Philip was in England, Joan of Austria was regent in Spain. Joan's minor son ascended to the throne of Portugal, and it was his grandmother, Catherine of Austria, who became regent there. Mary, Queen of Scots, Lady Jane Grey, Mary I, Elizabeth I, Joan of Austria, Catherine of Austria. All of these women were rulers or attempted to be rulers in Western Europe at around the same time. The final vignette is simply entitled The Queens of Russia. Catherine I of Russia, Empress, daughter of a Polish peasant farmer, was the first woman to rule Imperial Russia. This statement may seem to reaffirm the beliefs of those that believe in the patriarchy, until one realizes that Imperial Russia was established in 721 and Catherine became empress in 724 on the death of her husband Peter the Great. Despite being a peasant, Catherine was able to take the reins of power through the support of the Supreme Privy Council of Russia. This highlights a particular advantage that women had enjoyed in patrilineal systems: greater social mobility. By being able to marry into a noble family, a woman such as Catherine could see her position advance rapidly. In most societies, men have far more limited social mobility, and marrying into a powerful family was not nearly as advantageous. After reigning for only 3 years, she too died, and the imperial crown passed to Peter II, the grandson of her husband, Peter the Great, by another woman. Peter took the throne as a boy of 11, but would be dead only 3 years later, smallpox. After the Peter II's untimely death, the Supreme Privy Council had to choose a new empress from among 5 female candidates, all having familial claim to the throne. Finally, they selected Anna, niece of Peter the Great. Anna was selected partly because she had been successfully managing the Duchy of Courland for nearly 20 years as a widow. As empress, Anna founded the Cadet Corps to train young boys for a life in the military. She also re-established a secret police force known as the Secret Officer Investigation. These secret police would arrest and torture commoners who opposed the government. It is estimated that around 20,000 people were arrested by the Secret Office of Investigation during her reign. Anna has also changed tax laws in a manner that further bound serfs to their lord. She did, however, continue the programs of Peter the Great in modernizing Russia. When Anna died at 47, she left the imperial throne to a 2-month-old baby, Ivan VI. A year later, one of Ivan's relatives, Elizabeth, seized the throne in a coup. Ivan was held incommunicado by Elizabeth and subsequent Russian rulers and was forbidden to receive an education. In a story reminiscent of The Man in the Iron Mask, Ivan's jailers were prohibited from even knowing his identity. A noble publicly disclosed information about a planned coup to restore Ivan to the throne. Elizabeth responded by torturing the noble and executing all of the male conspirators. The female conspirators had their tongues removed and were publicly flogged. After Elizabeth died, her nephew Peter III took the throne. Peter's short reign was characterized by reform. He introduced 220 new laws during his 186 days on the throne, having been preparing them for years. Peter increased religious freedom, granted rights to serfs, and set about modernizing the economy. We know that Peter visited Ivan VI, who was still in prison. Perhaps he wanted to improve Ivan's conditions. We will never know if Russia would have become a happier and more prosperous place if Peter had remained in power. It wasn't to be. His own wife, Catherine, who was also his second cousin, overthrew him. He was imprisoned and died under mysterious circumstances. Yes, he was probably assassinated. Historians generally agree that the driver for the coup was Peter's reforms. Today, Peter is much maligned because most historians have uncritically accepted the accounts of Peter left by his wife and other people who usurped him. Catherine overthrew him with the support of the nobility because he was going to make the lives of the common people better. The woman called Catherine the Great started her reign by halting reforms. A more fitting name would be Catherine the Usurper. Under Catherine's rule, Ivan VI was still imprisoned. The identity of Ivan VI became known, and a plan was hatched to free him and place him on the throne. While initially successful, his jailers followed secret orders they had been holding since he was a baby and murdered him as soon as an attempt to free him was made. Catherine restricted the movement of Jews, creating the Pale of Settlement, where Jews were required to reside. The Pale of Settlement lasted until the Russian Revolution in 1917. She also required Jews to pay additional taxes. Eventually, Catherine the Usurper died, and her son Paul took the throne. Catherine clearly stated that Peter I was Paul's father, although his paternity is uncertain. Russia had the following people hold the position of Tsar or Tsarina: Peter I, Catherine I, Peter II, Anna, Ivan VI, Elizabeth, Peter III, Catherine II, and Paul I. This means that the role of Tsar or Tsarina went male, female, male, female, male, female, male, female, male, male. This presentation has covered a lot of areas. Matrilineality, matrifocality, and matrilocality are important in understanding ancient societies. Understanding agriculture, illness, and mortality helps with understanding any era of history. The vignettes in this presentation should give a small glimpse into the active role that women played historically in politics. When feminists talk about the patriarchy, they are talking about men systematically oppressing women. Most ancient societies were stratified. Powerful members of society controlled the distribution of resources and made the laws. They had a great deal of control over the lives of those below them in the social strata. In ancient times, as today, a person's nationality and social and economic class was a much better determinant of success in life than was gender. Peasant men didn't oppress their wives. The family unit typically struggled together just to survive. If a peasant family was being oppressed, it was generally happening at the hands of an aristocratic family that might have a man or woman at the helm. We see a link to the original idea of patriarchy. The traditional definition of patriarchy is a society in which men were head of the household. Using this definition, patriarchies were common, but feminists mean something else. Feminists define patriarchy as a society in which men systematically oppress women through the use of violence. Some of the more moderate feminist groups drop the explicit reference to violence. Feminist groups definitely rely on the confusion between these two definitions to further their agenda. This also ties into the idea, discussed widely elsewhere, that feminists have advanced their agenda by co-opting Marxist doctrine, replacing class with gender. Whether it was Berenice Ptolemy stealing the throne in her father's absence, Arsinoe Ptolemy trying to usurp her brother, and the first taking the throne, Anna of Russia reinstituting secret police, or Elizabeth stealing the Russian throne from a baby, it's clear that the queens and empresses of history were not mere pawns of the patriarchy. They were rulers to be feared as much as any man. They often murdered and tortured their way to the top, just like their brothers and fathers. This presentation and the speech I gave for ICMI 20 were drawn from material from my upcoming book, The Victorian Fallacy. If you've enjoyed this material, please keep an eye out for my book, which should be published around the end of 2021. Thank you very much.